Some people freeze to death because the storm finds them. Others freeze because they open the door. Ethan Cole learned that lesson 3 winters ago on the edge of the Vargos frontier, where the wind howled hard enough to shake steel walls and bury cargo haulers under 6 feet of ice overnight. His repair station stood alone against the white wasteland like a rusted coffin half forgotten by the galaxy. The old heating pipes groaned above him, while blue warning lights blinked across the control panel beside his workbench. Outside, the temperature had dropped to -60 degrees, cold enough to crack exposed skin in seconds. Ethan wiped grease from his hands and leaned closer to the station monitor when the proximity alarm suddenly screamed through the room. His eyes narrowed. Movement. Fast. Something streaked across the blizzard sky like a dying comet, trailing black smoke and sparks before vanishing behind the snow dunes east of the station. A second later, the ground trembled beneath his boots. Well, Ethan muttered quietly, reaching for his thermal coat beside the door. That can't be good. The outer hatch hissed open against 70-mile-an-hour winds. Snow blasted into his face instantly, sharp as shattered glass. Ethan lowered his head and pushed forward through the storm, guided only by the flickering emergency beacon pulsing red somewhere beyond the frozen ridge. The wreckage appeared slowly through the whiteout. A small escape pod, alien design, half buried in ice. Steam hissed from fractured metal seams while one engine sparked weakly against the snow. Ethan climbed onto the hull and forced the emergency latch open with both hands. The inside smelled like ozone and burned circuitry. Then he saw her. The alien woman lay collapsed against the shattered pilot's seat, breathing in shallow, uneven gasps. Pale blue skin glimmered beneath flickering lights. Silver hair clung to her face in frozen strands while strange black veins crawled slowly along her neck like cracks spreading through glass. Ethan froze for half a second, not because she was alien. Frontier worlds saw dozens of species pass through every year. No. It was the chains around her wrists that made his stomach tighten. Thin metallic restraints etched with glowing symbols. Prison restraints. One had already snapped open during the crash. The other still blinked red against her skin. Her golden eyes suddenly opened. Sharp. Alert. Dangerous. Before Ethan could speak, a thin silver blade pressed against his throat. "Don't touch me," she whispered hoarsely. Her voice shook beneath the storm outside. Ethan slowly raised both hands. Easy. The blade trembled harder. She was barely conscious. Ethan noticed dark liquid staining her side. Not blood exactly. Something thicker. It smoked faintly where it touched the metal floor. Poison. The realization hit immediately. He had seen chemical infections before during his medic years in the outer colonies. This one was worse. Whatever was inside her was spreading fast. Her breathing shortened. Sweat glimmered across her pale skin despite the freezing cold. Ethan exhaled slowly. "If I wanted to hurt you," he said quietly, "I wouldn't be standing out here freezing with you." For a long moment, the alien woman said nothing. Then the blade slipped from her fingers. Her body sagged sideways. Ethan caught her before she hit the floor. The second his bare hand touched her wrist, the black veins stopped moving. Both of them noticed instantly. Her golden eyes widened in pure horror. "No," she whispered weakly. "That's impossible." Then somewhere beyond the storm, distant engines echoed through the night. Ethan carried her through the storm with one arm wrapped around her shoulders while icy wind hammered against his back hard enough to steal his breath. The alien woman felt lighter than he expected, but heat radiated from her skin in strange, uneven waves, like her body could not decide whether it was freezing or burning alive. By the time the station door sealed shut behind them, snow had already melted across his coat. Warning sirens still pulsed red through the repair bay. Whatever ships were moving through the storm outside, they were getting closer. Ethan ignored them for now. Survival first. Questions later. He lowered the woman carefully onto the old medical cot beside the furnace pipes. Yellow light flickered across the room while ancient heaters rattled overhead. Up close, the poison looked even worse. Thin black lines spread beneath her pale blue skin in branching patterns that pulsed every few seconds toward her heart. Ethan pulled a portable scanner from the cabinet and ran it slowly above her body. The screen immediately flashed symbols he did not recognize. Alien biology. No surprise there. But the toxin markers made his stomach tighten. Synthetic infection. he muttered under his breath. Somebody made this stuff? The woman's golden eyes opened halfway. Exhaustion weighed heavily behind them now. You should leave me, she whispered weakly. Ethan reached for antiseptic cloth and thermal wraps. Not happening. If they find you helping me. Her voice faded beneath a painful breath. They will not ask questions first. Ethan glanced toward the frosted station windows where distant white lights moved through the storm like ghosts. Search craft. Probably military grade. Good thing I have never been popular with authority, he said quietly. For the first time, something almost resembling confusion crossed her expression. Ethan removed the damaged restraint from her wrist carefully. The metal hissed when it touched the floor. Even the cuffs looked expensive. Government issue. Maybe worse. What is your name? He asked. She hesitated too long before answering. Lasara. Ethan nodded once. Ethan. Her eyes narrowed slightly at that, as if the simplicity of it caught her off guard. Most species on the frontier introduced themselves with titles, ranks, bloodlines. Humans usually just gave names. Ethan opened a sealed injector case beside the cot. Inside rested 3 emergency antitoxin syringes meant for industrial chemical exposure. None of them were designed for alien physiology, but the poison spreading through Lasara's veins was moving too quickly to wait. This might help, he said. Lasara suddenly grabbed his wrist before he could inject it. Even weakened, her grip was surprisingly strong. Human. Her voice lowered into something more fragile. When you touched me outside, the poison stopped. Ethan looked down at her silently. He had noticed it too. The black veins had frozen exactly where his hand touched her skin. No medical process worked like that. Probably coincidence, he answered. But neither of them sounded convinced. Lasara slowly released him. Ethan injected the antitoxin into her arm anyway. For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then her entire body jerked beneath the blanket as heat rushed violently through the room. Frost instantly vanished from the nearby walls. Ethan stepped back in shock while warning alarms exploded across the scanner. What the hell? Lasara pressed trembling fingers against her chest, breathing harder now. Golden light flickered faintly beneath her skin. Not pain exactly. Something stranger. Fear filled her eyes again. Real fear this time. No, she whispered. The bond cannot begin this early. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, the station speakers crackled to life. A cold mechanical voice echoed through the building. Frontier citizen. Surrender the escaped asset immediately. Then the entire station shook as heavy engines descended outside through the storm. The engines outside grew louder until the entire repair station vibrated beneath Ethan's boots. Snow swirled violently across the frosted windows while massive searchlights swept through the blizzard like pale knives cutting across the dark. Ethan moved quickly toward the security console near the furnace wall and pulled up the exterior feed. 3 armored craft hovered above the ice ridge less than 200 yards from the station. No trade markings. No civilian registry. Just black hulls and silver insignias glowing beneath the storm. Military. Lasara saw them too. The moment her eyes landed on the symbol painted across one of the ships, the color drained from her face. Dominion Retrieval Division, she whispered. Ethan glanced back at her. You said you were running. I said they would not ask questions. Her breathing had become uneven again. The strange heat radiating from her skin filled the room with a faint metallic scent, almost like warm rain striking steel. Ethan noticed frost melting across the medical table around her body. What exactly are you to them? He asked quietly. Lasara looked away for several long seconds. Outside, a mechanical voice echoed through loudspeakers once more. This is your final warning. Harboring classified Dominion property is considered an act of interstellar obstruction. Ethan almost laughed at that. Property. The woman lying on his cot looked exhausted, frightened, and barely alive. Yet somewhere out there, heavily armed ships were calling her an object. He had heard enough governments talk like that during his years as a combat medic. It never ended well. Ethan opened a locker beneath the console and removed an old plasma cutter along with a weather-worn thermal rifle. Neither weapon looked impressive anymore. The rifle's stock carried scratches from another life. Another war. Lasara watched him carefully. You cannot stop them. Ethan checked the rifle's power cell. 23% charge remaining. Probably not. Then why stay? The question hung quietly between them. Ethan shrugged into his heavy coat again. Because opening the door feels wrong. Lasara stared at him as though she had never heard words like that before. Suddenly, the scanner beside her cot emitted another sharp warning tone. Ethan looked over immediately. The black veins beneath her skin had stopped spreading entirely now. More than that, they were fading. Slowly. Impossible or not, whatever happened when he touched her outside was stabilizing the poison. Lasara followed his gaze to the monitor. Fear flickered across her face again. It is accelerating. Ethan frowned. What is? She swallowed hard before answering. The bond. The station lights dimmed briefly as another gust slammed against the outer walls. Ethan walked back toward her slowly. You keep saying that. Lasara lowered her eyes toward the blanket wrapped around her hands. For the first time since crashing here, she looked less like a dangerous fugitive and more like someone completely exhausted from running too long. My species forms genetic pair bonds rarely, she said softly. Sometimes only once in an entire lifetime. Ethan leaned silently against the medical table while she continued. The poison inside me was designed to force compatibility detection. If my body found a match, her voice tightened slightly. The process would begin automatically. Ethan blinked once. You are telling me your government poisoned you to find a mate? Not a mate. Her golden eyes lifted toward him again. A breeder. Silence settled heavily across the room after that. Only the wind spoke outside. Ethan looked toward the frozen station windows where searchlights still swept through the storm. Then he looked back at the woman sitting alone beneath weak yellow lights with broken restraints still around her wrists. Something cold settled deep in his chest. Not fear. Anger. Quiet anger. Lasara noticed it immediately. Human, she whispered carefully. Why do you look at me like that? Ethan reached down, unclipped the remaining restraint from her wrist, and let it hit the floor beside the cot with a metallic crack. Because nobody should belong to anybody. Then every alarm in the station exploded at once as the outer security gate began to open from the outside. The outer gate groaned like an animal dying in the cold. Ethan stared at the security monitor as thick steel doors slowly separated under remote override commands from outside. Snow exploded into the loading bay in violent white spirals while armored figures moved through the storm beyond the entrance. Not soldiers exactly. Hunters. Their black environmental suits reflected the station lights with dull metallic glints, and every movement looked cold, precise, practiced. Ethan counted 6. Too many. He switched off the main room lights instantly. Darkness swallowed the station except for the dim yellow glow above the medical cot. Lasara pushed herself upright despite the weakness still trembling through her body. You need to leave me, she whispered again. Ethan walked toward the emergency power controls near the furnace wall. You already tried that speech. Human, listen to me. Her voice sharpened beneath the distant howl of the wind. If they discover the bond progression, she stopped herself abruptly. Ethan glanced back. The what? Lasara lowered her eyes. They will never stop hunting you. Outside, heavy footsteps echoed through the cargo bay. Ethan killed the furnace lights too. The room darkened further until only the blue glow from drifting storm light remained across the windows. He moved quietly toward the back storage corridor and motioned for Lasara to follow. She slid off the cot slowly, one hand gripping the wall for balance. Ethan noticed immediately that the poison no longer weakened her movements the same way. Whatever strange process had started between them, it was changing her condition fast. Too fast. He guided her through narrow maintenance halls lined with frozen pipes and old mining equipment. The deeper sections of the station had not been used in years. Dust covered the floor beneath old emergency lanterns while exposed wiring hummed softly overhead. Ethan finally stopped beside a hidden service hatch partially concealed behind stacked cargo crates. Inside, he whispered. Lasara hesitated before climbing down into the narrow compartment beneath the floor. The small space barely fit both of them once Ethan sealed the hatch quietly overhead. Darkness wrapped around them immediately. Only a faint amber emergency strip glowed along the metal floor beside their knees. Above them, muffled footsteps crossed through the station. Slow. Searching. Ethan could hear fragments of distorted voices through the ceiling speakers. Thermal readings confirmed. Asset remains nearby. Search all lower sections. Lasara sat very still beside him, breathing softly in the dark. Ethan became painfully aware of the warmth radiating from her body again. In such a cramped space, The heat surrounded him completely now. Not uncomfortable, almost calming, which made absolutely no sense. He shifted slightly against the cold wall. "You are overheating again," he whispered. Lasara nodded once. Strands of silver hair shimmered faintly beneath the amber light. "The process accelerates when you are close." Ethan rubbed tiredness from his face. "You keep talking about this bond like it is some kind of disease." "Sometimes it is." Her answer came quietly. Honest. Ethan looked toward her in the darkness. Lasara kept her eyes lowered while distant footsteps echoed overhead once more. "Among my people," she said softly, "bonding was once sacred, chosen freely. Long ago, sadness drifted through her voice like smoke. Then the Dominion discovered how to control it genetically." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest again. He had seen governments turn medicine into weapons before. This sounded worse. Much worse. Silence settled between them for several seconds. Then Lasara suddenly leaned forward sharply, gripping the edge of the wall beside him as her breathing shortened. Ethan reached toward her instinctively. "Hey." The second his hand touched her wrist, her entire body relaxed beneath the dim amber light. Both of them froze. The reaction was immediate now. No delay at all. Lasara stared at his hand resting against her skin, while golden light flickered faintly beneath the delicate veins near her throat. Ethan slowly pulled away. Neither of them spoke. Above their heads, one of the hunters stopped directly over the hidden compartment. Then a cold mechanical voice echoed through the station speakers again. "Asset Lasara Vane. By order of the Dominion Bio Authority, surrender your compatible subject immediately." The station fell silent again after the announcement ended. Only the wind remained, scraping across the metal walls above them like frozen claws. Ethan stayed perfectly still inside the cramped maintenance compartment, listening to the slow movement of boots crossing the floor overhead. Every few seconds, pale beams of searchlight slipped through tiny gaps in the hatch above them, drifting across Lasara's silver hair and the narrow steel walls around their bodies. She looked exhausted now, not physically alone, emotionally, like someone who had spent too many years waiting for footsteps to stop outside locked doors. Ethan understood that feeling better than he liked admitting. Another heavy step sounded directly overhead. Then silence. Lasara's breathing shortened instantly. Ethan could feel the tension in her shoulders even through the darkness. Without thinking much about it, he reached over slowly and rested his hand against hers where it trembled beside the wall. The reaction came immediately again. Warmth spread through her skin beneath his fingers, gentle this time instead of violent. The fear in her expression softened almost instantly. Ethan stared at her quietly. "That helps," he whispered. Lasara nodded once. Her golden eyes reflected the dim amber light beneath the floor. "Your nervous system stabilizes mine." Ethan let out a tired breath through his nose. That sentence should not make sense. For the first time since crashing into his life, a faint smile touched the corner of her mouth. Small, brief, but real. It changed her entire face. Less cold, less dangerous, younger somehow. Ethan looked away first. Outside the compartment, metal doors hissed open somewhere deeper inside the station. The hunters were spreading through every corridor now. "How long have they been chasing you?" he asked quietly. Lasara leaned back against the steel wall behind her. 3 cycles. That means nothing to me. About 8 Earth months. Ethan blinked once. 8 months running across frontier systems with an engineered poison inside her body. No wonder she looked exhausted. "How did you escape?" he asked. Lasara lowered her gaze toward the floor. "I stopped cooperating." There was something in the way she said it that made Ethan stop asking questions for a moment. He did not need details to understand what kind of place she escaped from. Silence returned between them again. Not uncomfortable this time, just quiet. The station pipes hummed softly around them while snow hammered against the outer walls overhead. Ethan noticed Lasara watching him carefully now, not like a prisoner studying a threat anymore, like she was trying to understand something impossible. "You are strange," she whispered eventually. Ethan almost smiled. "I get that a lot." No, her voice remained soft. "Thoughtful. I mean humans." She studied his face beneath the amber light. "You know helping me could destroy your life. Yet you continue." Ethan shrugged slightly against the wall. "Maybe because frontier worlds are already full of people looking the other way." Lasara stared at him silently after that. Ethan could almost see the conflict behind her glowing eyes. Confusion, curiosity, something warmer beginning to form underneath both. Then suddenly, her body tensed sharply beside him. Ethan frowned immediately. What is it? Lasara's breathing quickened again, this time not from fear. Heat flooded through the tiny compartment so fast that frost instantly vanished from the metal walls around them. Ethan could smell ozone in the air again, mixed with something unfamiliar and strangely sweet. Lasara pressed trembling fingers against her chest. No, she whispered weakly. It is happening too fast. Ethan touched her shoulder carefully. Talk to me. Her golden eyes lifted toward him with visible panic now. The bond reacts to emotional safety, she admitted quietly. The closer I feel to you. She stopped herself, struggling for control. Ethan's chest tightened unexpectedly at the fear in her voice. Not fear of him, fear of needing someone. Then above them, one of the hunters spoke directly outside the hidden compartment. Thermal signatures detected below the floor. Ethan slowly reached for the old plasma cutter resting beside his leg, while Lasara closed her eyes for one brief second and whispered something so quietly he almost missed it. Please do not let them take me back. The metal floor above them groaned softly as one of the hunters moved directly over the hidden compartment. Ethan tightened his grip around the old plasma cutter, thumb hovering near the ignition switch while cold sweat gathered beneath his collar. The weapon was outdated mining equipment, not military hardware, but in tight corridors it could still cut through reinforced steel. Or by time. Sometimes those were the same thing. Lasara remained beside him in complete silence except for her uneven breathing. The heat radiating from her body filled the cramped compartment until Ethan could barely feel the freezing walls anymore. Outside, another distorted voice echoed through the station. Life signatures confirmed below Sector 7. Ethan slowly exhaled through his nose. They were out of hiding places. The hunter overhead stopped moving. Then came the sharp metallic sound of scanning equipment activating directly above the hatch. Lasara closed her eyes briefly. If they capture you, she whispered carefully, they will erase your memory of me before transport. Ethan glanced toward her in disbelief. That is supposed to make me feel better? A faint sound escaped her then. Not quite laughter, but close enough to remind him she was still a person beneath all the fear and exhaustion. The scanner overhead pulsed louder. Ethan could almost picture bright thermal grids sweeping through the floor beneath their bodies. Seconds away now, Lasara slowly turned toward him, her silver hair brushing softly against the steel wall behind her. In the dim amber light, her golden eyes seemed almost painfully bright. There is something you need to understand before they find us, she said quietly. Ethan frowned slightly. Pretty bad timing for a speech. Please. The single word stopped him immediately. Lasara lowered her gaze toward her trembling hands. If the bond completes fully, it cannot be reversed. Ethan stayed silent. Somewhere deep down, he already knew that was coming. My species does not separate emotional attachment from biology, she continued softly. The process rewrites neural pathways permanently. Ethan leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pressing heavily behind his eyes now. Meaning? Lasara swallowed once before answering. Meaning I would never stop searching for you. The compartment suddenly felt much smaller. Warmer too. Ethan looked away first toward the narrow strip of amber light running along the floor. He should have felt panic. This entire situation was insane. Alien governments. Genetic bonds. Armed hunters outside his station during the worst storm of the year. Instead, the thing bothering him most was the fear in her voice when she talked about being taken back. Ethan rubbed one hand across his jaw slowly. You talk about this bond like it is a prison. Lasara's expression tightened faintly. For many of my people, it became one. Ethan studied her quietly for a long moment after that. Then the scanner above them suddenly emitted a loud confirmation tone. Hidden compartment located, the mechanical voice announced overhead. Ethan cursed under his breath and reached for the hatch release beside his knee. Lasara grabbed his wrist instantly. Wait. Ethan looked at her. The fear in her eyes had changed now. Still afraid, but no longer for herself alone. You can still leave me behind, she whispered. Once they see you are compatible, they will never stop hunting you either. Ethan stared at her hand, gripping his wrist. Small, cold despite the heat surrounding her skin. Somewhere outside, the hunters began forcing the hatch mechanisms open. Metal groaned sharply overhead. Ethan should have regretted everything already. Instead, He heard himself asking the one question that truly mattered. "If I hand you over," he said quietly, "what happens to you?" Lasara looked down for several seconds before answering. "I disappear." Silence settled heavily between them. Then Ethan reached over calmly, pulled the old thermal blanket from his shoulders, and wrapped it gently around her trembling hands. Lasara blinked in visible surprise. Ethan checked the power level on the plasma cutter one final time. 7% charge left. Not great odds, but enough. "Then I guess," he said quietly while the hatch bolts above them finally began to break loose. "They're going to have a very disappointing night." The hatch above them tore open with a burst of freezing air and blinding white searchlights. Ethan reacted instantly. He slammed the plasma cutter upward into the opening and triggered the ignition switch. A shower of sparks exploded across the compartment ceiling while startled voices shouted overhead. The old cutter screamed against reinforced metal before dying completely in Ethan's hands. 7% charge. Gone. But it bought them 3 precious seconds. Ethan grabbed Lasara's hand and pulled her through the narrow maintenance tunnel branching deeper beneath the station floor. Cold pipes rattled around them, while warning sirens echoed through every corridor overhead. Behind them, heavy boots struck metal as the hunters forced their way into the compartment. "This way," Ethan whispered sharply. The tunnel sloped downward beneath the station toward abandoned mining sectors built decades earlier during the colony rush. Hardly anyone used them anymore, because half the lower tunnels were unstable beneath the ice shelf. Ethan moved fast anyway, guiding Lasara through flickering emergency lights and clouds of frozen dust. Her breathing had grown uneven again, but she never complained once. Somewhere above them, one of the hunters activated external speakers. "Human citizen Ethan Cole." The mechanical voice echoed through the tunnels. "You are harboring classified Dominion property. Cooperate immediately, and your memory correction will be painless." Ethan almost laughed despite everything. "Memory correction," he muttered quietly. "That sounds healthy." Lasara looked at him while they moved through the dark. Even exhausted, confusion still lingered behind her glowing eyes every time he joked in dangerous situations. Ethan supposed humans looked strange from the outside, too. They reached a sealed maintenance door near the bottom sector. Frost covered the controls completely. Ethan wiped ice away with his sleeve and forced manual power into the rusted panel. The old door groaned open slowly, revealing a cavernous underground loading bay beyond. Massive mining equipment sat abandoned beneath dim emergency lights. Ancient cargo rails disappeared into black tunnels beneath the ice fields. In the center of the chamber stood something Ethan had not touched in years. An old industrial exoloader, 20 feet tall, thick armored frame. Originally designed to move mining drills through unstable terrain during blizzards. Lasara stopped beside him. "That machine still functions?" Ethan stared at the massive loader quietly. "Probably." "That is not reassuring." Ethan stepped toward the machine while emergency lights reflected across weathered steel plating and faded company logos. "I used to operate her before the station contract collapsed." He brushed frost from the side panel almost absently. "Never got around to scrapping the old girl." Behind them, distant tunnel lights appeared through the darkness. The hunters were close now. Ethan climbed into the exoloader cockpit and powered up emergency systems. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then deep beneath the machine, old reactor cores hummed weakly back to life. Dust drifted from the ceiling as hydraulic systems groaned. Throughout the giant frame, Lasara stared upward in visible disbelief while pale blue lights slowly awakened across the loader's armored body. Ethan leaned out from the cockpit hatch. "Get inside." She climbed into the secondary operator's seat beside him just as distant figures appeared at the far end of the loading bay. Searchlights swept through the cavern. Ethan sealed the cockpit and wrapped both hands around the worn control grips. The machine shuddered violently before rising to full height with a deafening metallic groan. Warning alarms immediately flashed across every display screen. Structural damage. Reactor instability. Low hydraulic pressure. Ethan ignored all of it. Outside the cockpit glass, the hunters stopped moving for the first time since arriving. Even they looked uncertain now. The ancient loader towered over the frozen loading bay like some forgotten mechanical beast waking from hibernation beneath the ice. Lasara looked between Ethan and the massive controls surrounding them. You are going to fight an entire retrieval squad with mining equipment. Ethan adjusted the cracked headset over one ear and allowed himself the faintest smile. Technically, he said quietly while the old machine took its first thunderous step forward. This is heavy industrial rescue equipment. The old exoloader shook with every heavy step across the frozen loading bay. Hydraulic pistons groaned beneath layers of frost, while warning lights flashed crimson across the cracked cockpit displays. Ethan tightened both hands around the controls as snow and dust swirled through the cavern beneath the machine's massive steel feet. Ahead of them, the Dominion hunters spread into defensive positions across the loading rails. Cold white search beams cut through the darkness and reflected across the loader's armored hull. Then one figure stepped forward from the others. Taller. Silver markings across black armor. Command rank. The distorted voice echoed through external speakers. Ethan Cole. This conflict is unnecessary. Ethan leaned back slightly in the pilot's seat. Funny. I was just thinking the same thing. Beside him, Lasara remained very still while the hunters focused their lights directly toward the cockpit glass. Her golden eyes reflected faintly against the control panels around them. The commander continued calmly. The asset beside you is classified Dominion property engineered for sovereign bloodline continuation. Return her immediately and your involvement will be forgiven. Ethan glanced sideways toward Lasara. The moment those words reached her, something inside her expression seemed to collapse inward quietly. Not anger, not fear anymore, just exhaustion. Like hearing the same sentence too many times finally hollowed something out inside a person. Ethan looked back toward the hunters through the cracked cockpit glass. You people really love that word. What word? Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Property. Silence followed. Wind howled through the underground loading bay while the ancient machine rumbled beneath them. Then the commander spoke again. Human psychology predicts emotional attachment responses under prolonged exposure conditions. Your protective behavior is chemically influenced. Ethan almost smiled at that. Or maybe, he answered quietly, you are just terrible at understanding kindness. Beside him, Lasara slowly turned toward him. Something fragile moved across her glowing eyes then. Something deeper than surprise. The commander's tone hardened immediately. Final warning. Surrender the compatible subject. Ethan frowned slightly. Compatible subject? He looked toward Lasara again. That is what they call me now, she whispered softly. Ethan stared at her for several long seconds. Then he shut down the external comm channel completely. Silence filled the cockpit except for reactor hum and distant storm winds vibrating through the cavern walls. Lasara lowered her gaze toward her trembling hands wrapped inside Ethan's old thermal blanket. You should not have stayed, she whispered. Ethan checked the failing reactor levels on the loader dashboard. 16% remaining. Probably not. They will hunt you forever now. Ethan looked at her quietly beneath the dim blue cockpit lights. You keep saying forever like it scares me. Lasara's breathing caught softly. Ethan did not fully understand what was happening between them anymore. The bond. The warmth every time they touched. The strange calm settling over her whenever he stayed close. None of it made logical sense. But neither did abandoning someone to people who spoke about her like machinery. Outside the cockpit, the hunters slowly advanced across the frozen bay. Ethan knew the old exoloader would not hold much longer. Too old. Too damaged. He reached toward the ignition controls anyway. Then suddenly Lasara touched his arm gently. Ethan looked over in surprise. Golden light pulsed faintly beneath her pale blue skin now, brighter than before. Not unstable anymore. Steady. Calm. Her fear had changed into something else entirely. Acceptance. Ethan, she whispered softly for the first time. Not human. His actual name. The sound of it in her voice hit harder than he expected. If they take me, she swallowed once. They will erase everything I became here. Ethan stared at her silently. Snow drifted across the cockpit glass while reactor alarms continued flashing around them. Then Lasara slowly leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently against his. Warm light spread instantly through the cockpit around them both. Every warning screen flickered white for one brief second. Outside, the advancing hunters suddenly stopped moving. Ethan barely breathed. Lasara closed her eyes softly and whispered the words like a vow carried through the storm itself. You are my mate forever. For a moment, nobody moved. Not the hunters below the cockpit. Not Ethan. Not even the storm roaring through the frozen loading bay. The golden light spreading beneath Lysara's skin reflected softly across the cracked control panels while her forehead remained gently pressed against his. Ethan could feel the warmth moving through him now too. Not painful, not overwhelming. Calm, like standing near a fire after surviving too many winters alone. Outside the cockpit glass, the Dominion commander slowly lowered his weapon first. One by one, the other hunters followed. Confusion spread visibly through their formation. Then the commander spoke through the external speakers again, but this time his voice carried something unfamiliar beneath the cold precision. Uncertainty. The bond has stabilized naturally, he said quietly. That should not be possible. Lysara finally pulled back slightly, though her hand still rested against Ethan's arm. That is because your scientists forgot something, she whispered softly. Ethan glanced toward her. What? Lysara's glowing eyes lifted toward the frozen loading bay below them. Bonds cannot be forced. Silence followed her words. Heavy, meaningful. The commander stared up at them through swirling snow for several long seconds before speaking again. Asset Lysara Vane. He stopped himself briefly, then corrected his own sentence. Citizen Lysara Vane. By Dominion law, completed sovereign bonding cannot be legally separated without consent from both parties. Ethan blinked once. Wait, he muttered quietly. You people seriously have laws for this? Lysara almost smiled again beside him. Small, tired, real. The commander ignored the question entirely. The retrieval order is terminated. Behind the armored mask, his voice sounded strangely distant now, almost respectful. Ethan leaned back slowly inside the pilot seat while reactor alarms continued flashing across the cockpit around them. After everything that happened, the silence felt unreal. No more threats. No more searchlights moving through the dark. Just the low hum of the ancient exoloader and the storm fading slowly beyond the cavern walls. Then suddenly, every warning display inside the cockpit flashed critical red at once. Reactor failure imminent. Ethan looked down at the controls. Well, he sighed quietly. There is the catch. The old loader gave one final exhausted groan before shutting down completely. Emergency lights faded across the cockpit until only the pale blue glow beneath Lysara's skin illuminated the darkness around them. Ethan let his head rest back against the worn pilot seat and closed his eyes for one brief second. He was tired, more tired than he had admitted to himself in years. Beside him, Lysara studied his face quietly beneath the dim fading light. Why did you do it? She whispered eventually. Ethan opened his eyes again. Do what? Protect me. Her voice softened further. You barely knew me. Ethan stared through the cracked cockpit glass toward the frozen storm outside. Snow drifted gently across abandoned mining rails while the Dominion ships slowly powered down in the distance. Frontier worlds were lonely places. Most people survived by learning not to care too much about strangers. Ethan had tried that once after the war. It made the nights quieter, but colder too. Because, he said finally, everybody deserves at least one person who does not give up on them. Lysara looked down immediately after hearing that. Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly beneath the old thermal blanket still wrapped around them. Not from fear anymore. Emotion. Several hours later, the storm finally passed beyond the mountains. A Dominion transport rested silently outside the station ruins while emergency crews repaired damaged systems across the ice fields. But inside the upper observation room of Ethan's repair station, none of that seemed to matter much anymore. Ethan stood beside the frost-covered window holding a warm metal cup between both hands while stars slowly emerged across the black sky above the frontier world. Behind him, soft footsteps crossed the floor quietly. Lysara stopped beside the window and looked upward too. The silver glow of distant galaxies reflected across her golden eyes. Then, without a word, she gently slipped her hand into his. Ethan looked down in surprise. Lysara never let go this time. Outside, endless stars burned silently across the universe. And for the first time in longer than Ethan could remember, the station no longer felt empty.